All right, today's section is 3-4, solving two steps and multi-step inequalities. It's some review, but also we're getting into kind of what are some of the trickier things you'll see and kind of some information for how to get around those tricky things. So I want to start out just filling this top part in, which should be review if you've been paying attention to the other stuff. So when we're solving these inequalities, you only flip the sign. By that I mean the greater than or less than, greater than or equal to. You flip the direction when multiplying or dividing by a negative. So if you add and subtract a negative, or if there's a negative number in the problem, totally stays the same. But if you multiply both sides by a negative, divide both sides by a negative, then you have to flip the order. All right, when we're solving for a variable, we always do order of operations, but backwards. We need to kind of undo things to get that variable by itself. And in order to undo something, if you have like a 5x plus 2, you want to move the 2, you have to do the inverse operation. So do the inverse operation, and I'll say 2 both sides. And in kind of layman's terms, a lot of times when people see inverse, they're really thinking like opposite. So if you ask somebody what's the opposite of multiplying by 4, like this right here, they know that it would be dividing by 4. Or if you call it an inverse, sometimes you lose people. All right, so let's jump down to some tricky examples. I have this first problem in here twice because there's two totally different ways to, well, two different ways to do it. The first way, which is probably more common that you'll see kind of in middle school or lower high school classes, is they're going to do distributive here. So I have a negative 4 times a positive 2 gives me negative 8. Then I have this negative 4 times a negative 3x. Negative 4 times negative 3 is positive 12. Then I have my x less than 32. And then, all right, so now we want to solve for our variables. We do order of operations. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally backwards. So right here, this is connected by addition, but because it's a negative 8, we need to add 8 to both sides. And I get positive 12x. I probably wouldn't normally write that plus. I just say 12x is less than 40. And then I can say, well, it's 12 times x. So I'm all done with my addition and subtraction here. So now I'm going to do my multiplication and division next. It's 12 times 40, so I need to divide by 12 times x. So I divide by 12, and that gives me an x is less than 3.3 repeating. All right, that's one totally legitimate way to do it. Should be fine. We didn't have to flip the sign because we didn't multiply or divide by a negative. This next one, though, I'm going to take and do the same problem but a different way. That instead of doing distributive, I'm going to say, well, because I have negative 4 times the whole rest of the side, I could take and divide both sides by negative 4. And you wouldn't be able to do this if you had like negative 4 times something plus 2. You know, you'd have to get rid of that 2 first. But I digress. Because it's negative 4 times everything else on that side, I could divide by negative 4. Now, two things happen. My negative 4 drops out. I'm left with 2 minus 3x. Because that's the only thing that's on that side, we don't need the parentheses anymore. My right side becomes a negative 8. But because I divided by negative 4, I need to change it from less than to greater than. And then if we go through and solve like normal, I have this positive 2 hanging out over here that's connected by subtraction. So I'm going to subtract 2 because it's a positive 2. Negative 3x is greater than negative 10. Now I'm going to divide by a negative 3. And my negatives cancel, my 3's cancel, and I just have an x. Because I divided by a negative, I need to flip that sign again. Then I have negative 10 divided by negative 3 is 3.3 repeating. So you get the same answer no matter which way you do the problem. So kind of pick the way that works best for you and do it. All right, nasty fractions. If you have a fraction key, feel free to work your magic. If you have a graphing calculator, if it's a TI-84 plus or on, you have a fraction function in there that you can use. You have to do, I believe, second and then, or maybe it's the alpha button, and then one of those, actually be the alpha button, then one of your graphing buttons along the top. I can show you in class. If you don't, you could just take and do it like normal, but always write the fractions in parentheses. That would work. If you're ever adding or subtracting fractions, put them both in parentheses. Multiplying, dividing, put them both in parentheses. You can kind of force your calculator to do your business. The other option, the book tries to teach it this way. I'm trying to decide which way do I do it. This is how I do it if I were you, I suppose. And then I'll go back to what the book's trying to teach us in a second. So it's plus 1/2, so I'm going to subtract 1/2 from both sides. 4/7 x would be left over here. It's still going to be greater than. And I'm grabbing my calculator, and I'm typing this in. So parentheses 3 divided by 7, parentheses. Then I want to say minus, parentheses 1 divided by 2. So you're kind of forcing it to treat them like fractions. So 3 divided by 7 in parentheses minus parentheses 1 divided by 2. And I'm going to get this negative 0.0714 dot, dot, dot. If you're going to actually punch that number in again, you'd have to write all the decimal points. But instead, I'm just going to say, all right, my next step is to divide by 4/7. Divide by 4/7. So if I would take and punching it in my calculator, so I have x is greater than, punching in my calculator, I'm just going to hit the divided by key, and when I do that, my screen is going to say ANS for answer. And then I'll have that little divided by slash in there. And after that, I want to do my parentheses for divided by 7 parentheses. So I have parentheses 4 divided by 7 parentheses. And now, when I have this answer, it's not taking this number. It instead is taking all those digits, including the ones over here that I didn't include. So I still have the, we'll say the exact answer. So I get negative 0.125. And that would be your answer. If you want to have your answer in a fraction, you have a math button. It's 2 down from your second key. So if you press math and then really just enter, enter. The first enter is going to select, change it into a fraction, so it'll say answer into a fraction. The second one will do it. And you get x is greater than negative 1/8. So that would work. The books, I'll just show it to you. I used to teach it this way back when I did Algebra 2 and when I first started doing Algebra, but nobody actually does it this way even when you teach it. But I shouldn't say nobody, but more people just hack their way through their calculator. But this is what the book tries to convince you is easier, and maybe you'll think it is. They look at all of these denominators. So I have a 7 and a 2 and a 7. They say, what's the least common multiple of those? And it's going to be 14. So they're trying to get you to take your whole thing and multiply everything by 14. So if I multiply all of both sides by 14, it's going to keep it so it's still that same value on each side. So when I do that, I do 14. You could do it on your calculator, 14 times 4 divided by 7. But 14 times 4 is going to give you 56. Divided by 7 is 8. The other way to look at this is though it's a couple of fractions. You could say, all right, the 14 and the 7, you get a 1 and a 2. 2 times 4 is 8. But however you want to look at it. So let me get rid of that. So I have 8 x's. Then 14 times 1/2. So I'm doing distributive. Gives me a plus 7 is greater than 14 times 3 is going to be 42. Divided by 7 is 6. And now I could go through and solve this thing here, and I get that exact same answer. And so it's really kind of up to you. If you do that, you're rid of all the fractions a whole lot easier, a whole lot faster. One like this. So flipping over to the second page, and we'll pick up the pace here. Moving over to the second page. I would start here because it's all of this numerator divided by 4. I would